Welcome in, listener. You're listening to a segment from the Slumpbuster podcast with Ju-Ju Dre. Find the full episode on Spotify, iTunes, the Google Play Store, or our YouTube channel. Enjoy. So, again, Rob Manfred under criticism for the Astros scandal, but he's also under criticism for this new baseball reformatting, kind of what they want to do with the playoffs, with the wild card. Tell me if this system piques your interest here. So 7 teams would go to the playoffs each year. If you're the number 1 seed, you would get a first-round bye. That remains that you would have the division winners, the first 2 division winners of each league, and then the first wild card would be able to pick who they would want to face in a division series, a best of 3 series. For example, if you're the number 2 ranked seed in the league, you would get to choose between the 5 through 7 seeds. If you're the third, you would get to choose the remainder of the 2. And if you're the first wild card, you would face whoever didn't get chosen out of that field. From there, of course, you would have the 3 teams advance. The lowest seed would face the top seed, and then you would proceed from there. What do you think of this change? Because Trevor Bauer, who's now a starting pitcher with the Cincinnati Reds, basically said, Rob Manfred, this is obviously a rule that was made by someone who doesn't play baseball or doesn't watch baseball. But I mean, yeah, baseball's just trying to be creative. I think the ultimate FU is, of course, the fact that you get to choose your opponents and basically say, hey, we think we're going to kick your ass in this 3-game series and move on to the next round. Steven, do you have a take? Do you like the new playoff proposal?
Yeah, you know what? I'm not. I'm all for adding more teams, but as far as choosing who you think you want to play or who might be the better matchup for you, doesn't really, it sounds compelling, but I don't think it's a good idea because what if that comes back to haunt you? Let's say you win your division, you want to pick so-and-so to play you, and they end up beating you. You know what I mean? I just don't think it's a good idea. I think they should add more teams and keep it, 1 plays 8, 2 plays 7, and so on and so forth, and maybe get a bye here and there. But as far as choosing your opponent, I don't know. That just sounds a little too much for me a little bit.
Yeah, I think I'm sort of along the lines with Steven in that it does sound a little bit gimmicky, right? Like no other playoff system does this, and it's just this sort of weird thing. It's almost like The Bachelor, right? Like, who do I want to pick, right? And who's going to be my lucky mate for playoffs? But I do think that it is sort of an interesting concept and a little bit intriguing to me. Like, I wouldn't mind seeing it 1 year, maybe just to test it out. I don't know if I'd want to stick to it. But I do wonder, one, who would make those decisions, right? Like, would it be the GM, the coach, the players, right? And then, like Steven said, it sort of adds into this calculus of, hey, why are we going to choose that team that we're going to choose? Are we going to choose it because we just think we're that much better than them, right? So we think it's going to be an easy win for us? Do we think we just match up better stylistically? And maybe it's better for you to say, hey, I'm going to actually take technically the team with a better record that looks a little bit tougher, but I match up better against, right? So that way I could get one of the tougher teams out of the way and leave some of the less tough teams on the table for the next round or whatever it might be. So I do think that it is really interesting. I think it could be an intriguing concept, though I think it's very hard when it comes to actual implementation. And it does sort of come off as a gimmick in some ways.
Well, we thought the All-Star game rule changes were going to be a little gimmicky, and those actually ended up working out. We'll talk about that a little later. I think that there is a certain element that I do agree with in a way. The big argument for this is more teams in the playoffs dissuades tanking, or at least you would think. In the NBA, that doesn't really exist because if you make the playoffs as an 8 seed, you really don't have much of a chance. But in baseball, we literally just saw the Washington Nationals take the wild card spot and win the World Series last year. The hot team can make a run and rattle off a couple series. And then in the first round, in particular, in this choose your opponent format, a best of 3 series, teams play 2 or 3 series all year. And there's plenty of upsets in those series. I mean, the Padres could beat the Dodgers on any given Friday through Sunday series. It's one of those things where it's like you're picking your opponent. You may be picking your poison. You may be picking the team that's going to knock you out of the playoffs, which would add an added FU element if you're the third wild card and some team says, okay, that's the person I want to face, which I don't know. If you want to talk about potential rivalry building, I do think that there is some merit to that as well. Like these damn Phillies, they're picking the Pirates again or something like this, something like that. I like it to an extent, but the tough thing is with baseball, they're so rigid in a lot of these traditions. You can't touch the sanctimony of the game. I mean, when it came to something like replay, which is a concept that we can all agree about, that we want calls to be made right, and baseball was like, no, let's just kick it down the road for another 10 years. I do think that it won't happen. This would be dead upon arrival when it hits the voting.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to last long. I mean, it might pick up some heat because it sounds interesting, but I mean, I could see it maybe like in another sport, but not the MLB. I think the MLB is a little too traditional, and if it's not broken, why fix it? Why tinker with it? But I'm all for adding teams into that playoff format. But as far as picking opponents goes, I don't think that's the way to go.
Do you think it actually does dissuade tanking?
Yes and no. I think in a way, like tanking to play like a certain team in the playoffs.
No. I'm saying tanking for draft picks, because that's been a big part of baseball. When you look at some of the records at the bottom of the league, they're just putrid because teams aren't even trying to win.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and they're all trying to copy, ironically, the Houston Astros formula, because the Astros had a few years there where they weren't even trying to win, and they made no bones about it. And then it led to them gain some great prospects, Bregman, Correa, all the guys we know today as World Series champions, quote, quote.
I don't know. I think tanking might be kind of the long way of doing things. I don't know how long that process could take. I mean, tanking in baseball takes a long time to turn it around. I think, because the Astros took a while to get going, right? And finally they got there.
It was about like 3 to 4 years, but That's not terrible. That's actually probably one of the better well-done ones. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you want to talk about it, tanking, organizations like football, the Raiders have been at the top of the draft for the last 15 to 20 years. What has that done for them?
Yeah.
You have to have the right people up top to be able to properly pull off a tank. Even when you look at the 76ers, who are one of the more notable tanking jobs in sports, yeah, they got some elite talent, Simmons and Embiid, but they also missed on Nerlens Noel. They also missed on a couple other draft picks. I mean, Markelle Fultz lasted, all of 1 year there before he was shipped off to Orlando. But again, back to the original question, more teams in the playoffs, more teams who have an opportunity to, again, be that hot team, get into the playoffs, win the World Series. Does that mean more organizations are going to be less inclined to, at the trade deadline, trade off their superstar and continue contending in the latter months of the season?
I think that it does, right? Especially, one, you have a greater chance of getting in than what you currently do now. So, hey, I might play a little bit harder just for my chance to make it into the playoffs. The other thing, too, is that with this system, there's no guarantee, right, that you would go up against, let's say, the 2 seed, right? So the 2 versus 7 or whatever, right? Or 1 versus 8 is generally how things are set up when it comes to brackets. So now, even if you're the 7, right, maybe you only have to play the 3 or whatever it is rather than what you normally would. So you almost have a better chance of, hey, maybe I won't get picked by the best opponent out of the bunch, and maybe somebody else does something strange and chooses somebody that's better than my team, right? And I end up getting an easier path to the World Series. Now, granted, you're still going to be a lower seed, right? You're still going to have to play tougher competition theoretically, but it might not just be a straight, hey, you're the worst team and you're playing the best team.
Mm-hmm. So obviously you're a big fight fan, Aundre. You're a big MMA fan. Fighters all the time call out their opponents. They call out who they want to fight. They pick and choose. Like Khabib, if he wants to fight Conor, will say publicly, I want to fight Conor, and that fight will be scheduled to happen. And the fallout from that, depending on who gets knocked out, who gets beat in that situation, is up to the interpreter. But do you kind of agree with it from that standpoint? Like a fighter calling a shot? Does that kind of speak to your inner UFC fan?
A little bit. So I like it because, like we've been saying, there's sort of this element of, hey, I've got a chip on my shoulder, right? Because I'm the one able to call you out. I think for whatever reason, I can beat you. But then also the person being called out sort of has a chip on their shoulder. Every time somebody says hey, I want to fight that guy, it's like, all right, we'll make that a rivalry. I think it does have the potential to also generate a lot of revenue, right? That's how we always see it, is everybody calls out Conor McGregor because that's going to be the big money fight. Everybody, calls out John Jones. That's going to be the big money fight. Israel Adesanya, that's a big money fight. So it would be interesting to see if, MLB, if baseball can sort of do something similar. Hey, we know the game that the fans want to see, right? So we're going to make that happen right off the bat, and we're going to call them out and see, hey, what's going to happen. So I think it can sort of make things a little bit more interesting. That being said, when it's one-on-one, right? So when it's fighters, there's a lot more trash talk involved. There's a lot more antics and stuff like that. I think it is a little bit more tame when it comes to team sports. You don't have people throwing water bottles at each other and hitting buses with dollies, right? And stuff like that. So it makes it a little bit less entertaining when it's a team calling out a team. But I do think that there's always an element that people do want to watch anytime that there's picks involved, right? Even on the basketball court outside of the high school, right? When it's hey, we've got team captains and so picks that player first, the other player or other person takes another player, similar to the all-star game sort of format that the NBA's adopted. People like to sort of see that drama when it's like, who did they pick and, why did they not pick another team, or why did they pick that person? So I think it just adds to the intrigue.
Well, I mean, hashtag bulletin board material. If you're the team that got chosen or got put on the spot, you just put that on every single person's locker and say, they chose you. They think that they're going to walk into our stadium, kick our ass, and we're going to be a first round exit. Well, let's not let that happen. Again, baseball is just so weird in the sense that if you have the right pitcher on the mound, you could win game one, you could steal momentum in the series, and suddenly all you need to do is pull off just one more win and you're into the next round. So, and then I do worry about it. If you are the number one seed, you have to wait. Waiting is generally frowned upon in baseball. Like, pitchers come off rusty, hitters, if they're not consistently seeing what a curveball looks like or being able to time out a major league fastball, someone has a funky motion, that actually throws off their timing significantly. So I feel like this would hurt the number one seeds more than people think. Rest is not encouraged in baseball.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to say in the first segment of this. Is it's all about who gets hot at the right time, I think, come playoff time. And let's say you do get chosen. Let's say a higher seed picks you to play. You pull off that upset. You go on to the next round. And, of course, the number one seed coming off rusty, they've had a couple of days off, maybe a week. And, you can take them. It makes it really interesting and compelling. But, again, I just don't see it happening. I don't see it happening.
So then would a better solution be maybe not a bye, maybe they add just even one more team, which I know it sort of sounds like it's watering things down, right? You're just adding a bunch of team after team after team. But that way there's an even amount of teams, so nobody gets a bye. But then you still have the picks, basically like 1 through 4 get to take their picks.
No, that makes a lot more sense than the original idea that MLB's coming up with.
I'm just happy to hear that baseball's open to trying stuff because, again, it's been a sport that just stuck in the same slow lane for the last few years. And I know there's a lot of baseball fans that will come at me for well, don't try and change my game. It's well, if we don't change and adapt this game, eventually what's there going to be left of the game? And baseball's done a great job in international markets, which I will always give it credit for. I mean, if you look and see you have teams in Israel now, when you watch the World Baseball Classic, you have all these great talented Dominican players coming out to play, all these great Cuban players that are coming out of existence, like the fact we find hidden gems like Shohei Ohtani or Tanaka from Japan. I think that's a great thing that baseball's been able to do over the last few years. But in terms of the actual innovations to the game, the sport's been the same for almost 100 plus years. And I do think that in order to capture the new fan base, the new people coming up, they have to realize we can't just stick in our ways. Eventually, all the boomers are going to be gone. It's just going to be up to us millennials, the next generation, to carry on the sport. And hey, there's always going to be baseball players. There's always going to be people that throw 100 miles per hour and they just need to utilize their talent. But we diminish their stage by allowing the sport to die and fall off in viewership like it has.